blockheads. Stop reading the Windows 2000 source code and listen up. It's time for another stellar edition of .NET Rocks, the internet audio talk show for .NET developers with Carl Franklin. This is Karen Cavallero here to announce show number 50, .NET Success Stories, Episode 2, with guests Chris Kinsman and Jesse Ezell. Recorded January 20th, 2004, and published Monday, February 16th, 2004. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net, training developers to work smarter, and by Data Dynamics, makers of ActiveReports.net. Simple, powerful, and cost-effective reporting for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.datadynamics.com. Support is also provided by Code Magazine, Microsoft Technologies in-depth for IT managers and developers. Online at www.code-magazine.com. And now, the man who claims the leaked Windows source code is really a clever fake, perpetrated by Linux zealots, Carl Franklin.
Gotta get enough points to finally land me a place in the online gamers hall of fame.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thanks, everybody. I am Carl Franklin, as you know, and welcome to my show. This is .NET Rocks, episode number 50, as Karen already said. .NET Success Stories. This is the second in a series of success story shows that we're doing on an ongoing basis. The guests today are Chris Kinsman and Jesse Ezell, in that order. But before we talk to them, I thought I'd like to just mention what we're doing here at .NET Rocks. For those who don't know, we're switching over to a live format. That means the show is broadcast live and it's streamed with Microsoft Windows Media Services on a Windows 2003 server box, and we're basically streaming it live. So if you want to catch that, come to our webpage, www.franklins.net/.NETRocks, sometime before Friday at noon, and it's going to be from noon Eastern to 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to start in earnest this Friday, February 20th. So don't miss that. Before I introduce my first guest, let me read an email here that we got from one Kevin Bartness. Sorry, Kevin, I don't have the right emphasis, but that's your name. Carl, I like your show for many reasons, but the main reason is that it gives me a measurement of my skills as a developer. I am the only developer at my company and have been mostly self-taught. I often find myself wondering if I'm doing things that other developers are doing, or if I understand how all the new technology is to be used. Your show not only gives me the basis for measuring my abilities, but also how the new technology is used, not to mention that the show is very entertaining. Well, I hope to be able to call in live someday and take your class. Keep up the great work, Kevin Bartness. Kevin, thank you very much. And just for being a nice guy and sending us a mail, we're going to send you a copy of Microsoft Money 2003 Deluxe, which has had a #1 rating. So compliments of Microsoft in the box and everything. All right, well, let's get on with the show. My first guest is on the line, Chris Kinsman from Vergent Software. If you've been to VBits or if you've been to conferences or read magazines, you probably have seen Chris's name. He's also been a frequent speaker at INETA-based user groups. And, well, without any further ado, welcome, Chris.
Hey, good to hear from you, Carl.
Vergent Software, that's your deal?
Yeah, that's my thing that I've been doing now for about 3 years or so. Started it when I left DevX. Got out of there because I really felt like I wanted to be doing .NET development pretty much full time, and that wasn't where they were going at the time, and figured it was time to strike out on my own, and did so, about probably 10 months before .NET 1.0 shipped.
And we were just talking before the show that we met each other about, 10 or 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago?
Yeah, a long time ago on CompuServe when you were doing stuff with Crescent. Doing all those great sockets with VB books back then.
Yeah, I was doing serial communications back then. But
yeah, I remember that, yeah.
When I first saw, sockets and the internet, I threw my modems out the window.
Some definite correlation there.
Absolutely. So you're no stranger to the internet yourself. In fact, you got into it rather early. I remember.
Yeah, I got involved with, IIS very early on when it first shipped and was using IDC files and all the great little things like the Olay2 ISAPI COM shim that we had to try and fire up COM objects in VB and VB CGI programming using, IO redirection. Good times.
Yeah, for some reason I seem to remember the Olay2 ISAPI or ISAPI Olay ISAPI DLO or whatever it was sort of had some problems. I can remember like there was a bad version and then there was a new version, and because it was on Carl and Gary's VB homepage, and I remember having getting a lot of email about that one.
Yeah, one of the VB devs actually at the time was a guy named David Stutz, who later went on to lead the Rotor project in the .NET world.
Yeah,
was the author of that particular little extension. Basically, a way to try and allow the VB developer to do ISAPI style programming in VB. And the first edition, definitely had some issues. And I don't think it was back and forth.
I don't think it was a code issue, his code, as much as it was like a COM registration issue or something. You know? Those were rampant back then. Yeah,
all that nightmarish time before the managed code.
Well, now, you mentioned you left DevX. DevX.com, of course, was started by Fawcett Technical Publications as their portal website for developers.
Exactly. They kind of started out with a bunch of scattered websites. In fact, I think when I went to work for them quite a few years ago, it must be about 7 years ago now, they had around 35 or so websites. And that was one of my first efforts there, was to kind of bring them all onto a common platform and bring them under a common naming scheme, as it were, while trying to maintain their identities. They were really catering to pretty diverse communities. They were trying to attract the VB developer at the same time as attracting the Java developer, and kind of like oil and water in that particular case.
Right. Yeah. So, and you naturally, water down, to continue the metaphor, you water down the effectiveness of marketing to each of those platforms because they're associated with the enemy,
Right.
But it must have been interesting at that time. And this is a show about success stories. So, in .NET, so I don't want to take up too much time, but it is an interesting story that, you were basically trying to build the Taj Mahal with mud and grass, basically.
Yeah, this was back in the ASP 3.0 days. In fact, we started when I got there running on NT4. And if anybody remembers IIS4, while it was a great platform, it's nowhere near where IIS6 is today. We definitely had a few issues with IIS going out to lunch and dealing with things like apartment, threading in VB being used as COM components in ASP, and just a lot of headaches, and figured out ways to work around those, and ended up running a fairly successful site in the end.
Yep. And I bet you didn't sleep much back then.
I can definitely remember at least a couple of Thanksgivings and Christmases where I was not far from a computer.
Well, you mentioned that the performance and the feature set and the stability of Internet Information Server has definitely improved over the years. We were talking at the Peer Summit, actually, about a project that you did for a insurance software company, where I see if I can remember the numbers right, but you're replacing a system that had 600 servers with 6 servers.
Yeah, that's currently the plan, actually, Carl. The system that's in place today, or actually is being phased out today, was a system that was originally built as a 2-tier system with a VB/C++ front end talking to SQL Server on the back end, your classic client server app. And it's been around for quite a few years. In fact, that was the 3rd iteration of this app. The app originally started out on a VAX VMS system years ago. And the problem that they had is, as we moved into this internet age, their clients wanted to go ahead and use this app in more of an internet-type basis. And one of the other issues that they ran into is that for a small insurance agency, this is meant for independent insurance agencies, they couldn't necessarily justify going out and buying their own SQL server and their own server and running it in-house. And even if they could justify it, they really had no one to maintain it and make sure it was being backed up, et cetera, et cetera. So a few years ago, this company got the idea of, let's come up with an ASP offering from the standpoint of an application service provider offering.
Right.
and allow the end user to pay us a monthly fee. We maintain the SQL server. We worry about the backups, etc. So their solution to doing that was to do this all via Citrix.
Wow.
And consequently, it was immensely successful. A lot of their agents bought into this and liked the idea of not having to maintain essentially their own, database server in-house. And they ended up with a scenario where ultimately they ended up with about 600 Citrix servers.
Good Lord.
In a data center down in College Station, Texas.
Does each one of those, I haven't used Citrix in a project like that, does each one of those servers support only one user at a time?
It doesn't support one user. It's actually very similar to Windows Terminal Services.
Okay.
So it does support multiple users connected to the server at a time, but it's essentially like multiple users using remote desktop into that one server.
Okay.
And so they're all sharing the memory, and they're all sharing the processor.
Oh,
so there is definitely some limit to the number of users that you can actually get dialed into each server.
Right.
And that's why there's the 600 and something or other servers.
Okay.
If I remember right, and I could be totally off, it's in the tens of thousands of users that they support overall.
So now the plan is to go to 6 servers. Are those 6 servers going to be doing the same thing, like serving up a desktop, or are they going to be? Is it going to be an auto-deployed app?
No,
What's the architecture?
Actually, we looked at. I was brought in way early, kind of during the architecture phase of this project, and they kind of knew they wanted to go to .NET. They had a code base that had been being patched and kind of hacked on through about 5 or 6 versions. It was really a mishmash of various pieces of code. In fact, I joked with them, Carl, and you'd probably appreciate this, that depending on which dialogue they brought up in the application, I could pretty much tell them what year that dialogue was created.
Yeah.
Because they'd bring up one dialogue, and it would have 3 levels of 3D going into the dialogue and 4 levels of 3D coming out of the dialogue, and I'd say, that's when the Control 3D and VB4 shipped.
The invasion of Control 3D DLL.
Exactly. And then they'd show me another dialogue, and I'd see this other dialogue, and the other dialogue was clearly one that they'd done with Borland Resource Workshop, because it had the little white dots and the green check marks and the big red X's.
The big red X of Borland.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so really kind of a patchwork, and they decided it's really time for us to start over. We really want to place our bet essentially on .NET. We think that's where things are going, which I thought was actually pretty brave of them considering, because when I was coming in, again, this was about 10 months before .NET 1.0 shipped.
Wow.
So it was a pretty big bet that they were taking. And their initial thought was that they wanted it to be a purely web-based application.
Uh-huh.
And that's why I was brought in, and I started doing prototyping and trying to figure out, can we make it a purely web-based application? And the more we looked at it, it was an application that really wasn't that suited to ASP.NET, actually. Because if you think about what you have to do in an insurance-type application, they're, for example, filling out the actual application data for an insurance form. And in the case of, depending on the type of business that they're writing this insurance for, that could be gathering 4,000 to 5,000 pieces of information.
Jeez.
Not exactly your typical app that you want to do in an ASP.NET style, where you're constantly doing postbacks to do validation and things along those lines.
Lots of view state data.
So we really had a pretty strong mandate, however, that they didn't want to go down the route where there was client software installed, because they didn't want to worry about the headache of doing the updates and everything else. So we ended up coming up with this approach where it's a blended application that actually blends ASP.NET and auto-deployment or smart client or whatever you want to call it, WinForms, and ties those together.
Good for you.
The end user's entrance into the application is by logging into a website. They log into that website. There's a lot of stuff they do in a purely web-based approach, and they don't even have to have the .NET framework on their client to do that.
Right.
But in the point in time that we're going to start doing what I would term some heavy-duty data entry and things along those lines, they actually would, for example, say, I want to do a claim, or I want to write a new insurance policy for someone's vehicle or something along those lines. We actually, at that point, then activate some smart client pieces that are on the workstation. And those then communicate back with the back end via web services and get the data pulled down that they need to do. It actually does all the validation and all the data entry client side based on some workflow engines that we've created. And then when it's saved, it's obviously saved back onto the server via the web service.
So those pieces that exist on the client, are those pre-installed, like Windows services, for example, or applications that exist?
So we kind of went back and forth with that for quite a while. We definitely had some issues surrounding the code access security pieces,
right,
in terms of what we were allowed to do and what we were able to interact with. And so we kind of had to balance kind of the two pieces of this, in that we really didn't want to force the client to install a lot, but we knew at the very least we were probably going to have them install a policy that would give us potentially elevated access to do things like, for example, export data to Excel or write cache files to the local disk and things along those lines. And so given that we knew that we were going to have to install a policy, we actually did have them install a small executable on their system. And that executable itself is actually updated as they log into the web page. So we actually do that via a Windows Forms control hosted in the web page to actually update the initial executable that's on the system.
So
that executable hasn't started yet.
So they already have the framework on their system.
Yeah, they've already got the .NET framework, and they've even essentially done a very small install that we give them. It's about $270K that puts on our security policies into the security policy manager for .NET, and then also installs just a few little files there that when the web page starts up, it communicates to those using remoting from a Windows Forms control hosted in IE down into this executable that's actually living on the local system.
That's neat. Let me just back up a little bit. How many users would you say this support? I mean, I know you had 600 servers, but how many users are we talking about?
The end goal of this, if I remember right, is to have along the lines of probably 30,000 end users at some point using the system.
Wow.
When we're built out to that point, we probably will have more than 6 servers. 6 servers was our initial deployment.
How many now?
Today we have on the order of, if I remember right, 5,000 to 6,000 users up on the system, and we're adding literally more each month because we're converting the older users that were using the old system onto this new system. So
the security policy little program that you install, obviously you agree with me that you should think of the .NET framework not as something that you bundle into your setup program like we did with VB6, but a system upgrade more along the lines of a service pack.
Exactly. And in fact, I mean, that's one of the things that we tell them up front. We have some prereqs for this app.
Yep.
For example, we require IE6. We require that they're running in Windows 2000 or Windows XP, or I think we support, I can't remember off the top of my head, Windows 98. But just like we require IE6, we also require that they have the .NET framework installed before we even start up.
That's great. And that's the way it should be, I think. Old habits die hard, and I see people trying to bundle in, the installation of the framework with their software setup, and that's just not the way it's done.
Right.
Of course,
we haven't had any pushback really at all so far. And in fact, some of the folks that I thought we'd get some serious pushback from, this actually gets sold into some large banks and things like that. They had no issues at all with it. In fact, they were cool because they actually used their own internal software distribution systems, i.e. like SMS and things like that, to push the framework out to all the desktops, as well as our little install that we required to be installed to upgrade the security policies on the machine.
Yeah.
And from their user standpoint, all their users had to know is they had to click a link in an email that said, this is how you go to the app.
Now that brings up the security issue. Now you said this. I'm just curious about this initial client because that seems to be where the issues come up, with security. How do you get that to them? And also, do they have to be logged in as an administrator in order to install that security policy? And how do you deal with that issue? Right.
And those are two very good questions. In fact, our application itself does not require them to be logged in as an admin. But as it turns out, a couple of things that our application does install, specifically Crystal Reports, which if you're familiar with that at all, it's not exactly managed.
Nope.
And consequently, it has all the COM registration issues and things like that. And to do COM registration, you do have to be a local admin. So that's actually being handled by the folks that are doing the push-out installs in most cases via SMS. There's a way to indicate that needs to run in a local admin context. In the cases where we just have, onesie-twosies users and small agencies, we just indicate to them that they need to be logged in as an admin on the box before running our installer.
Okay.
And in fact, we put up a warning if they try and run our installer when they're not in an administrative context.
And SMS can get around that issue by executing a setup program as an administrator?
Yeah, very similar to how you can do a run as.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Sure.
You can indicate that you want a program to run as a particular context.
Yeah,
they can do a similar type of thing, and they can indicate that, for example, they want to run it as a particular domain account that has admin rights on that box.
Now, do you see that as a security issue, like a security hole? I just mean the fact that you have these tools like SMS and Run As that, that if somebody gets a hold of those, that they can install things that require admin privileges.
Right, and I don't think it's that much of a security hole because they still require you to have the account that you're going to do that as.
That's true.
So, and you have to not only have the account, you have to have the password.
Right.
So if you have the account and password, you could obviously get to the local box potentially, unless there's physical security preventing you. From that standpoint, I'm not too worried about it. We were concerned about it from the standpoint of our code.
Right.
Because we are definitely installing some bits on the box, and we want to make sure that those aren't used as potential attack vectors.
Did you use any obfuscation tools?
We aren't using any obfuscation today, but we are being very careful. The little executable that we install, it essentially starts up, and it gets a remoting server for all intents and purposes that we call upon services that it exposes.
Yeah.
And we've been very careful, for example, to make sure that we don't open any ports that are available outside the machine.
Right. Okay.
That essentially the ports that we open are only available on the loopback, and that even with that, we also do some things to make sure that the folks that are actually calling into our remoting objects are actually our applications instead of someone else.
You do some authentication in the remoting as well. Yeah, that's one thing that is missing really from the remoting infrastructure. I don't know how much.
I think that's also why those guys argue that remoting is really used for in-process communication than cross-process.
Yeah.
I kind of disagree. I think. I don't think that remoting is one of those things. It's a replacement for web services, which a lot of folks will tell you.
Yes.
It's more performant. That's what you should be using. But at the same time, I think remoting definitely has a place on the local machine for cross-process communication.
Sure. Well, it is the out-of-process model. I mean, there isn't any way else to do it.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. Unless you're going to go all the way down to the sockets level, in
right.
which you're going to actually, not have the abstraction that remoting offers and still have all the same problems.
Exactly.
So I think it does solve a particular problem, and it works well for us, but I think folks are using it for a lot more than it really should be used for. I
was just talking about sockets with Chris Sells and Rory Blythe in the last show, and the issue is that it's like raw. It's raw data with no protocol. You don't even know like when you've got all the data that was sent and how to interpret the data that was sent. You have to have some sort of protocol on the top, but it does come in handy when you have platforms such as, Pocket PC that don't support remoting. Then you have to go down there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if you're talking to process A from process B on the same machine, remoting seems like a really obvious solution there. Yeah,
and it seems to be relatively lightweight, and works well for that scenario, and it's worked well for us so far. So, in fact, it's funny you mentioned the sockets thing on Pocket PC. We actually did an app recently, which was for a casino for filling slot jackpots that was actually done on a Pocket PC device in this case.
Wow.
And the Pocket PC device communicated wirelessly back to a server, actually using web service calls to communicate with a player management system.
Hey, before you get into that, and I want to talk to you about that, but let me just wrap up this last application that you did for the insurance software company. How long did it take, and how many people were involved? And obviously it's a huge project. How many lines of code was it before? And give me some sense of the task at hand and how long it took and all that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure the number of K-locks before. If I were to hazard a guess, we're probably talking about 4 million to 4.5 million lines of code in the product we were replacing. It's a product that's been through 5 versions or so it's a relatively large product. The new product, again, I'm not real clear on lines of code. It's definitely fewer than that. One measure that I do have is that we have currently about 289 assemblies that make up the product.
Whoa.
Which just building it on a nightly basis is an entertaining process. We've actually had to make a lot of our own build tools to make all that work.
Yeah.
But it's fairly sizable. Number of developers, it was probably about, I'm going to say 12 developers, and there were probably about 6 analysts.
Okay.
And the first version took approximately a year to get out. The
That's
first
not
version
bad.
is not covering 100% of the features of the app that it's replacing. The second version is doing that, which we're actually currently in progress and working on now. And that second version took about a year also to get out. And, with a few more programmers, I think we're up to around 16 or 17 now.
Wow. That's still pretty impressive considering the scope of the project.
Oh, yes. Very large project.
So speaking of, you were telling me about the slot machine application.
Yeah, we've actually done a couple there. The one I was thinking of when you started talking about the sockets, we did one on Pocket PC, which was a compact framework app. It spoke to a backend via web services. But the reason we ended up getting into sockets is we needed to be able to communicate with a printer on the Pocket PC device.
Ooh.
And there's no printer drivers on the Pocket PC.
Right, of course,
in fact, the printer we wanted is, those little printers they have at Hertz when you rent a car? They got the little printer on their belt?
Yeah.
We wanted exactly that. And so we went looking around, and we finally found a vendor, Zebra, that makes actually a printer, if you can believe it, that's Wi-Fi enabled.
Ooh.
So it's an 802.11b-based printer, which we had to, go ahead and get it on the network, etc. But then the only way we could talk to it was via sockets because there's no printer driver support in Compact Framework.
Oh, man, that's smoking.
But it was still very cool, and it enabled us to kick out the little receipts that we needed to kick out so folks could sign them and say, yeah, I got my jackpot and stuff like that. So that was a very cool application that we used of sockets on Pocket PC.
So you talked directly to the printer through TCP/IP? Like you were sending it escape codes and stuff?
Yep. Well, it's a pretty simple printer. It's not a graphical printer like we think of as a laser printer. I mean, think of a receipt printer type of printer, essentially.
So you're sending in ASCII characters, basically?
Yes, with escape codes to do things like centering and bolding and, different font sizes and things like that.
Oh, that
Very
sounds
much like
fun.
talking to an old dot matrix years ago.
Yeah.
Very similar.
Yeah.
So that was one fun one we did there. And we actually did another app for the same company, which was on a custom piece of hardware that they had actually built their own CE-based machine for doing player management on a slot machine. We then wrote the UI entirely in Compact Framework. And it was pretty cool because actually we did this about the middle of last year. And we actually came up with a language that looks scarily like XAML, as it turns out.
Oh, man.
To drive the UI of this application. It was all XML-based. To describe not only the layout of the UI and where the graphics showed up, but what actions should actually happen when pieces of UI are interacted with and the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
So they showed that at the GES Gaming Exhibition this year in Las Vegas. And
so
got great reactions to it.
So this application was the slot machine itself, like what the user interacted with, or was it something that you ran on the slot machine?
If you've ever been to Vegas and you see a slot, they've all got those little card slots on the top where you stick in your player card to get points.
Okay.
And they've, got a little LCD that says, "Welcome, Carl, you have 500 points," right? So this is a replacement for that.
More often than not, they say, "Welcome, Carl. It's been a pleasure sucking your money dry."
Exactly. This is a replacement for that little, maybe 1 or 2 line alpha display is being replaced with a 640 by 200, or actually 640 by 240 touchscreen, full color. That can play. We were actually playing video from within Compact Framework onto it.
Neat.
Doing sound, and then actually generating our own UI to interact with the user. And that was then talking with a back-end system via some shared memory protocols that we'd set up.
So it was basically a way that you could act with their account, basically, and distribute them points. And
Yep.
Yeah.
And in fact, the communication, you're a serial guy, you'd love this, was all done over RS-485 multi-drop to the back end.
My serial days are over. I hope I never have to write that code.
They aren't in casinos, I'll tell you what. They've got a ton of that 2-pair wire in there, essentially.
Yeah.
That's the lifeblood of their communications for the older casinos today. New ones, as they're being put in, they're putting in Ethernet and things like that, but not nearly as common as the old RS-485 stuff.
Chris, one of the coolest things that I remember you talking about at the Peer Summit was how you hooked into the build process in VisualStudio.net in the events, the build events in C#, and went off and created an elaborate scheme to build your application.
We actually don't hook into the build events. In fact, we do all of the build ourselves. When we first started this and we were getting this number of projects, it was ridiculous to think that we could build this app nightly inside of VS.net.
Yeah.
That was just not going to happen. And so at the time, also, NANT was fairly nascent. It really wasn't.
NANT.
NANT is a build system, a .NET version of something called ANT that really came out of the Java community.
Okay.
Which is a command line build tool, which we actually use now for some of our smaller projects.
I'm thinking of version.
Good in the intervening time.
I'm thinking of version control. There was something that you said you were hooking. Maybe it was a different project. Something you said you were hooking these events, and you were writing assemblies into a structure and copying them up to a server, doing like check-in, check-out stuff.
Well, maybe I'm trying to remember exactly what that was relating to.
I can't remember.
We do some really kind of bizarre things in the insurance app we have a couple of forms that need to use some COM objects, but we want to do smart deploy, and clearly COM objects aren't easy to do smart deploy.
Yeah.
So we've got some clever packaging schemes where we take the COM objects and package them up as resources inside of a .NET assembly. And then that .NET assembly gets pulled down to the client along with the form that references it, and then we actually unpack them on the fly and register them on the system so that they're then available for use on the form.
That's living dangerously, huh?
It's, it's something we had to do. We definitely don't do it all over the place, but, it's kind of a pain. And that's probably been our biggest pain point on this project is when we need to go out and find something. Many of the things that we need, we just can't find in a purely managed state. What's
one of the coolest problems, and I mean this in the way that it was solved? What was one of the biggest challenges that you had the coolest solution for in this project? Just pick one.
Oh, interesting. So probably the coolest one is we started down the road just doing pure smart client deployment, where .NET handles all the downloading of all the assemblies and figuring out all the dependencies and things like that. And we quickly found that in many cases that kind of fell down. It didn't quite do what we wanted.
Right.
It was so very close. But either, it wasn't as performant or any number of things because of some of the probing it was doing to find out if it had to update assemblies. So we actually put a system in place that we replaced the .NET loader, where we actually have a XML file that we term a manifest that we bring down from the web server where our assemblies live. They give us all the remote versions that are available up on the web server.
Oh, cool.
And whenever you ask me to load a form, I actually trace the full route of all the dependencies that form has from top to bottom, looking at what's on the local disk versus what's on the server, and then actually do a smart process of actually downloading just the ones that are required or just the ones that have changed.
Oh, that's neat.
And then based on that, then instantiate the form locally. And then the final kicker to that is once we had that in place, we also had all the pieces in place. We now actually do proactive background downloads using bits.
Right. I was going to bring that up.
So we take that same manifest, and on app startup, they're ordered in the order of least dependent to most dependent.
Right.
So we actually start essentially loading the leaf nodes of the dependency chain first, all the way up to the most dependent, and go ahead and do that just in order and just chunk through them in bits, which means that, if the user stays logged into our app, for a couple hours, by the time, they go around to launch their next piece of the application, more likely than not, all of the assemblies that make up that piece are already on their system.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a lot of what they're addressing in Click Once.
Somewhat. Click Once has a lot of the same concepts because they do have the idea of kind of an application manifest that indicates what makes up the application and things like that.
The offline mode kind of thing.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I sure wish Click Once would have been here in 1.0. It would have saved me a lot of headaches.
I know.
Pretty cool technology.
Very cool. We just had a show with Brian Noises, and he sort of gave us the lowdown on Click Once. I can't wait.
It's very cool stuff. It actually came out of something, I don't know if you saw very early on, there was something called the App Updater.
Right, the application block.
Jamie Cool put up there. He's one of the PMs on the .NET team, and that kind of became Click Once after a few morphings here and there.
It's great. The innovation that's coming out of Redmond is just awesome.
They have a lot of smart guys there.
They do.
There's no question about that.
Well, and you're local, so you fit right in up there.
Yeah, I've avoided that great sucking so far.
Yeah, I bet they try to recruit you every day, huh?
I've been in for a few, but the right position just definitely hasn't come up.
Yeah.
So I think I'd probably I really don't know. I worked there years and years ago, like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And my big worry is, I have a lot of freedom in picking the projects that I want to work on right now. I get to work on a lot of fun things.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy what I'm doing. And, I'm worried that, yes, I'd get to work on some big things that a lot of people would see. I don't know that I'd have as much fun.
Yeah, you probably
wouldn't. I
wouldn't.
like what I'm doing now. So far I've avoided that big noise out of Redmond that not as many folks have. I mean, you mentioned Chris Sells. He got sucked up from Portland there.
Right. Yeah, and Don. Chris and Don both recently.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, relatively recently.
Well, it seems like every time I turn around, there's somebody, else that I know that's gotten pulled in there. It's quite a pleasant change, though, because if you would have asked me the same thing 5 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
5 years ago, it was everybody I talked to some guy and, I just left Microsoft. People were leaving all over the place.
And Alan Cooper said this on his interview way back last year. He said that, with .NET, it seems almost as if Microsoft took all the stupid people and fired them, and they brought in a bunch of smart people. I mean, that's typical Alan Cooper to make it black and white like that, but it's kind of funny. I mean, they've really... the biggest criticism that I heard from Microsoft from the Unix camp back in the days, the late 90s, let's say, was that, they don't listen. They don't listen to, and they don't learn from the experiences that, and the experiences of other platforms and other developers on other platforms, especially Unix. They haven't learned from the mistakes that Unix has made and learned from and then adjusted for. So you saw problems in NT4 and in Windows 2000 that had already come up and been addressed in previous versions of Unix, blah, blah, blah. So, and that's totally, they've done a complete 180 on that.
At least in the context of .NET.
Absolutely.
You can definitely see that they've pulled from a lot of different platforms.
And the server,
Java,
too.
From Pascal, etc.
The server, too. I mean, Windows Server 2003 is more like a kernel server that you can add features to than a big application that you have to disable things. It's more of that. It's more configurable with XML files and more command line tools and things like so. And they really have done that. They've hired a lot of smart people and they've learned from all these technologies.
Well, the challenge is that that team started out relatively small, and that's pretty easy to do when you've got a small team. But as that grows and pervades the company, can they keep that up?
Yeah.
It's going to be their big challenge over the next few years.
Well, now that they have a stable framework on which to build, I think they've got a great shot at it.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to see what's going to happen in Whidbey. I mean, I've seen a lot of this stuff, but a lot of exciting stuff coming out of there.
Yeah. So what's next for you? You speaking anywhere soon? Writing a book? What are you doing these days?
Not doing any speaking as of late, any writing as of late. Going to be doing some speaking. I'm going to be at ASP Live in San Francisco come March at Moscone.
Great.
Co-located with the Mobile DevCon down there, so that's going to be pretty exciting. I've been doing more and more mobile stuff, so I can't wait to see what those guys are doing.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I wish you continued success in this project and all future projects. And, it would be really cool to have you on every once in a while for people to call in with perplexing questions that, need to be answered. And have
that'd be a blast. It'd be kind of like the old Midnight Madness stuff.
Exactly. And that was a lot of fun. And I remember in particular, and, I might sound like I'm gushing here, but you always seem to have the right answers. So,
we'll see how it happens, I guess, when we put me on the spot in front of a bunch of live folks calling in. It'll be a blast, though.
Yeah. All right, Chris, man, thanks a lot, and keep us updated on the progress of this great project.
Will do. Nice talking with you, Carl.
You too. All right, I'll see you later.
Talk to you later, Carl. Bye-bye.
Bye. So if you've got a report writer and you're not satisfied with it, or you're still looking for reporting solutions, you got to check out activereports.net. And I'm not just reading copy here to you folks. I'm talking from experience. I also happen to know that many of the regional directors and MVPs swear by ActiveReports.net. People who come into my class, my VB.net masterclass, when I ask, what are you using for reporting? More hands go up for ActiveReports.net than any other reporting engine. So don't take my word for it. See for yourself. Go to www.datadynamics.com and look for ActiveReports.net. It really does rock. And you can download an evaluation version and get a report up and running really, really quickly. They've got a great walkthrough. And, you don't have to configure up lots of crazy report servers. It's not a replacement for Crystal Enterprise. It's not that kind of thing. It's much, much more simple, much more clean. You get PDF, you get HTML, you get it all. Check it out at www.datadynamics.com. Let's get back to our show now, .NET Success Stories Part 2, right here on .NET Rocks. Hey, don't you go away. Well, my second guest today is Jesse Ezell, the co-founder of ActiveHead, a .NET consulting company in Joplin, Missouri. He's been working with the .NET framework since the early betas. He's an active member of the .NET community and spends the majority of his time designing and coding .NET software solutions. How are you, Jesse?
Doing great. How are you doing?
Doing fine. We first met in the blog sphere, I think.
Yeah, we did.
We've exchanged some comments. I saw some comments about you. You were an early listener of the show. Yeah,
I've been listening since not quite since the first couple weeks, but I would say since the first months, definitely.
Yeah, and we've enjoyed your comments and such.
Definitely vocal about my feelings on the show. It's a great show. I love it.
Cool. Well, we're going to put a link up to your blog, by the way, because it's a good blog in its own right. But, of course, this is a show about success stories in .NET, and we put out some feelers to people who wanted to tell some stories, and you piped right up and said, yeah, I've got a great success story. So I guess we're going to talk about your PowerPoint to Flash conversion application. That really caught my eye and my attention. I like Flash. Flash is very cool. And, of course, I don't program in Flash MX or anything like that, but, it's one of those things that I feel like I have to do someday, So tell me about the application.
So basically, let me give you a little background. I started working with the Flash file format itself quite a long time ago. It was one of the kind of original things that got me going in consulting, and it was all C++ based work. And so this was a while before we had the .NET framework out.
Okay.
And what I put together was a library called SwiftSource, which allowed developers to create Flash content without using Macromedia Flash. And the idea there is that you can't really script Flash and have it create, like custom animations and transitions without using ActionScript. And ActionScript has some real big limitations. And so what we developed was kind of like a file format library that allowed developers to write to Swift.
And this was before .NET?
Yeah, this was quite a few years before .NET, maybe 2 or 3 years before.
Okay, was that a public product or just something you did?
It was an open source software product.
Huh.
It was one of those things where Macromedia had released their own file format SDK, and I had been working with that just to see, this is cool. You could really develop some sweet Flash applications if you weren't confined to the limitations that kind of Flash imposes on you, because especially the early versions of Flash were really designed for designers, not developers.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were a lot of products that came out around that time, like Swish, which kind of took text effects and stuff to the next level with Flash. And this was all a result of Macromedia releasing the file format documentation along with their own file format SDK. And there were some problems around their SDK dealing with licensing issues. No one really knew like what the boundaries were, where you could use it without kind of getting stuck or screwed over in the end.
It sounded like they wanted to keep their options open, huh?
Yeah, so people wanted to keep their options open, as well as Macromedia's SDK wasn't really written by Macromedia. It was written by some other entity, and whoever did it just did a horrible job, and so there were tons of bugs, and if you ever used it, you spent more time debugging your code to fix their bugs than you spent debugging your code to fix your own bugs.
Hey, you know what a coincidence. I happen to have the developer of that product on the line right now. No, I'm just kidding.
And so what ended up happening was we sat down and I just started coding a library based off of their file format specifications that actually worked. And originally it was just a kind of a side project, something fun to do. But what ended up happening is everyone apparently had the same issues I was having, and we just had, tens of thousands of downloads just in a matter of months. Wow. And so it was really big, really booming, and everyone was kind of looking for these applications to make that were like these applications that could generate Flash but weren't part of the Flash player. And probably the number one question I always received was, how can I take a PowerPoint file and put that up on my website? How can I convert that to Flash? Right. And so what ended up happening is a few companies were either watching the message boards or thought of the idea themselves and said, you know what, this would really be a great application because the built-in, Flash, convert it and put it in HTML stuff it doesn't work, and sometimes it locks up your browser, and the quality is just real poor. And so a couple companies contacted us a while back about, we have some plans to go through with this, and none of them really caught our eye. They were like, yeah, you can do it, and some of them just didn't want to pay enough money to do it, and some of them just didn't have a good plan, so we didn't go with them. But then finally, Articulate came along, and they really had a good vision for creating these. They kind of extend PowerPoint, and so you're not just putting a static presentation out there. You're able to do things like add narration and timings, and add quizzes and objects to your PowerPoint to really make it a rich environment for training on the web.
Wow, sweet.
And so their idea was that they would enable business users to create full knowledge portals based off of these PowerPoint documents. And so you see a lot of cool stuff happening where you have like a sales team, and that sales team wants to train all their sales reps. And so their sales manager can create some presentation, add some narration, maybe some links, some documents, and an assessment at the end. And then they can send it out to their employees, say, go visit our portal, watch X presentations, and then get, feedback and tracking and reporting based off, who actually watched the presentation and how did they do on the test. So it's a pretty significant
application. I mean, pretty involved, it sounds like. Very feature rich. Now, this was an application that was a Windows app or a web app or what? Or what was it?
It's really a hybrid. So we have on the client side a Visual Basic application that extends PowerPoint, and that handles all of the PowerPoint specific side of the conversion.
And that's a VB.NET, right?
No, that's plain old VB.
Okay.
And the reason there, of course, is because the redistributable for .NET is so large that when they're doing a lot of electronic distribution, they don't want people to have to download a 30-megabyte demo. They'd rather keep it small at 5
Okay, so the target is still the public at large.
Yeah, so they want to be able to have a wide install base as possible. And so basically the idea is anyone who has PowerPoint above, I believe it's 97, can run the application without any additional large downloads. And so we have a Visual Basic add-in that handles all the PowerPoint stuff. And then we have a COM component which handles the details of the Flash file format and basically has calls like add a sprite or add a graphic, animate this sprite.
Okay.
Real Flash-specific stuff.
And that's all like at the client?
Yeah, and that's on the client end. And then on the back end, we have a ASP.NET portal which utilizes WYSI and web services to communicate with that client for uploading documents.
WYSI being the web service extensions?
Yeah.
And that communicates with the VB6 app?
Uh-huh.
So you had to code the WYSI extensions for VB6, or did you use a toolkit?
Yeah, we used one of the SOAP toolkits, and there were some issues. I think it took us a couple weeks to actually get WYSI up and running on top of VB6. Mean, it's real easy with .NET since .NET to .NET everything's built in.
Right. But
the SOAP toolkit didn't really have a lot of the support for things like WS Security, which we were using. And so it was real easy to get using the SOAP toolkit. It was really easy to get the basic calls up and running, but adding authentication took a couple steps.
Yeah, I bet.
And there were also some other issues like session type issues with that web service because a lot of our back end stores a lot of tracking and logging information inside the session, so we had to allow session with our web services as well.
And we were talking before the show that this was originally an ASP application, was it? And now you're doing a port?
Originally, the portal was written in ASP, but going forward, it didn't make too much sense because when you're coding in ASP, you got to do a lot of things like weird includes, and the application was kind of getting mangled, and there wasn't a real good separation between business logic and presentation and data access. It was just like everything was thrown in there, and there wasn't a good way to communicate with the VB app.
Right.
It all worked, maybe not as fast as we would have liked, but it did get the job done.
I've been there.
Yeah, but that's how all ASP applications are, unless you're going to be doing like some heavy-duty COM work in the back end, which is just as bad.
Yeah.
So when we looked at it and said, how can we enable ourselves to rapidly develop the portal and be able to add new features as quickly as possible and kind of just allow a platform that would eventually be extensible so that other developers could plug into it. And the obvious solution was, port it to .NET and go from there.
Now you ported it to .NET. Did you start over, or did you use some of the existing stuff? What was the migration process like?
Yeah, the original idea was that we would split out their existing logic from the presentation layer and isolate that into DLLs and create our .NET app. When we got into it, after about 2 weeks, it quickly became apparent that, that's not going to work. It was just so mangled that taking all that out was going to be just as fast as rewriting it.
Yeah.
And we really had some time constraints too. We had a scheduled release date for the next version, and we knew that if we had to rewrite the entire data access layer, there was just no way we could hit this date.
Right.
So one of the decisions we made was actually to use a object relational mapper to kind of take care of that data access layer for us.
So what exactly did that do? Was the data access layer in a DLL?
Well, what happens is we're using the Entity Broker project from Sona Consulting, and basically it works a lot like what Microsoft is doing with object spaces in the next version of the framework. And so you can design a bunch of classes and mark them up with attributes and say, here's the ID of the class, here's the type of this column. Mm-hmm. And then by adding this metadata to your classes, it can go and automatically generate the SQL commands to retrieve and to delete, to do just about anything you would be doing with your data access.
Okay.
Now, it does have some limitations, like if you're going to be doing lots of reporting, we end up hand coding a lot of that just because it's hard to get the performance you need, as well as a lot of times you want to return a normalized result set where you have like just 10 columns that might have come from 5 different tables.
Sure. Yeah. So how many developers worked on the how many developers worked on the original and then the migration, and how long how long is it taking and all that? Give me some.
On the original, we had a group of guys from Wiretree working on the ASP side.
Okay.
I coded the COM module that handled that Flash piece, and then there was one of the MVPs for Office handled the PowerPoint add-in application.
An all-star cast, as it were.
Yeah, so it took us probably maybe 8 months, a year to get the original version all spec'd out, up and running.
The ASP version. And how long did the conversion take?
We had a prototype up and running within probably about a month or two that had our basic features, and then to fully flesh everything out, get all the reports we needed, and fully debug and test. It was probably about 6 months, maybe a little more, but I'd say 6.
And it was the same group of guys?
Yeah, it was the same group of guys, except that Wiretree moved from doing all of the ASP side of the application to focusing on only the interface of the ASP application and the interface of our Flash-based player. And I took over the back end and the .NET coding on the portal.
So how many people from Wiretree?
I believe it was 2.
And they're a consulting company, right?
Yeah, they're a great, probably one of the best design, web design firms that I know of.
And we're basically talking a small,
top-notch stuff, always winning awards for it.
So we're basically talking a small handful of people here.
Yeah.
And it took you about a month to do a port to the first rev, at least of the ASP.NET version.
Yeah.
The guys who how did the people who did the .NET conversion learn .NET? Was it all just by rote, by reading books, or did they get any training? Or
well, I had been working with the .NET framework since the betas.
Right.
So when we started porting it earlier this year, I had already had a ton of experience just consulting as well as working on our own product.
So you learned it just by reading the help files and books and things?
Yeah, when ASP.NET was first coming out, and it wasn't even ASP.NET, it was like ASP
Plus.
Yeah, we were all kind of interested, and as soon as we saw a preview of some of the things you could do, it was like, oh my goodness, you can just drop a calendar on a page and code it? That's amazing.
That's an impressive thing to show people.
Mm-hmm. I think it was the calendar control that did it for us. Even though we never even used the calendar control because you always want like a date picker, it was still, it was so much cooler than ASP.
Yeah, that's an impressive thing, and especially if you've lived through the pain of doing that manually. So, what kind of performance increases did you? And I'm going to ask you that within the framework of the hardware too. Tell me what hardware the ASP ran on, and what hardware it runs on today.
Well, we actually upgraded our servers and beefed them up because we wanted to handle a much larger load, and so the ASP version was running with kind of a small group of clients, and when we made the .NET port, what we did is separated from one server running IIS and SQL Server to a massive 4-processor box running the web server, and then another big box running the SQL Server.
Okay.
So performance, it wasn't like we did that because we needed all this extra performance as much as we needed a lot of extra capacity.
Headroom.
Yeah, I think it's hard to compare performance as well because the second application was so much richer than the first application.
Yeah.
Like the first application didn't really have what we call workspaces, which are similar to what you'd have in SharePoint, where you can go in and add, a piece of text on a page or some news items on a page.
Well, let's talk about the success part of the success story. Who's using this application?
They have a large amount of customers using their application. Everyone from Liz Claiborne, Dell, Johnson & Johnson, FedEx, McGraw-Hill. The list goes on.
That's an impressive list of clients.
The company is called Articulate. It's a top-notch product, real similar to Macromedia has a product called Breeze they acquired from Presidia.
Yeah.
But their version is not anywhere as slick as ours.
Cool. And is this an application that you could buy and run on your own servers, or is it something that you subscribe to?
Yeah, there's actually a few different editions that they offer. They offer a standalone conversion application that doesn't hook into the portal and lets you do stuff if you wanted to have some presentations, say, available on your own site.
Yeah.
And you could use that for things like financial reports or executive briefings. And then they also offer a hosted version of the portal and a product version of the portal that you can buy and install on your own servers.
Huh, cool.
And they actually have a very large number of users from the Veterans Administration running the portal in a standalone. I think it was something like 10,000 users. So
wow, that's great, man. What a story. So you've done some other things that you're proud of in .NET. Obviously, we were talking about a content management system that you have done or are working on, or
we're actually about to release our first major product for our company, and it is a .NET-based content management server.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, basically, the idea is for someone not familiar with content management, kind of traditionally, if you look back 10 years ago, people would go to web designers and developers and say, hey, I need a website. Can you design me a website? And in the beginning, it was like people would design this static website.
Now change it for me.
And now, hey, I want to change this graphic or I want to change this text. And so they call their company and they just say, we want to change this. And the company would go up, change it, upload it to the FTP.
Right.
And it didn't take too long for that process to get real old.
Yep.
I mean, because one, it's just not fun to be updating the site. So the company isn't really going to be excited about going and changing a piece of text, no matter how much they're getting paid to do it.
I hear you.
And so it kind of tends to fall in the background, and it's like, well, we're working on this other project. We'll do it when we have time.
No,
and
also,
especially since it's one of those things that takes 30 seconds, it's easy to keep pushing it off and keep pushing it off.
And developers kind of feel insulted when somebody calls them and says, hey, can you change the phone number on the website? It's like,
hey, you do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I write the code, you change the content, yeah.
Yeah, and so then you saw a lot of products coming out like Front Page, which were allowing people to kind of be more involved with the process and edit the pages themselves, but the problem with these products was that you were generating HTML content.
Right.
And so if you really wanted something that was dynamic, pulling from a database or searchable, you needed these other pieces to plug in.
Right.
And they're not cheap to develop. I mean, if you go out to a good consulting company, it might cost you, $125 per hour just to put a form on your site.
So suffice to say, the content management system is the administrators section where they get to define the content, not the markup, but the content. Maybe sometimes the markup, but without having to write any code.
Two pieces, because you're going to have like templates that define, this is how I want my site to look.
Right.
But there's a clear separation between that and the content on your site, because regardless of whether the look of your site changes, the content will probably remain relatively the same. It will grow, but you're not just going to say, hey, we're going to rewrite all our content today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what we decided to do, and what a lot of companies have been doing, is moving over to kind of a system to manage your content and just give you easier access so that when you do decide to extend your site or when you decide to add some type of personalization, you don't have to just code a ton on the back end.
Now, what about Microsoft's content management server? How does that fare to what you guys are doing?
Yeah, Microsoft's content management server is actually pretty similar to what we're doing, except that we have real different focuses. So Microsoft's content management server allows you to get a site up and running, but at least from our standpoint, it takes a lot of work still to do, and their pricing isn't exactly easy on your wallet.
Okay.
And so if you're a real large company, it might not be too bad for you because you're going to have some IT staff there, and you're going to have the bucks to go out and pay.
How much are we talking, by the way, for
Microsoft's content management server?
Yeah.
I think their entry level edition starts at like $7,000 for like 15 users.
Oh my goodness!
But it's kind of like a stripped down version. So if you want to get like the real version, you're going to pay quite a bit more, and then you also have, of course, additional licensing costs depending on the number of administrative users you have.
Okay, so what does yours cost? I mean, why not just lay it out?
We're looking at right now around $4,000 for the introductory price, which is the full-fledged version, and so it's not, still, you don't have a stripped down version. You start out with like a 5 or 10 user license.
It's still not walking around money, but it's cheaper, but it's still not walking around money.
Yeah, it's still not cheap because this isn't intended to be for a 5-page website. Chances are they don't really need a content management solution.
Right.
We have been throwing around ideas to kind of meet those needs because even though it might be a 5-page site, it would be nice for them to be able to update their site. And so we have been tossing around kind of lower pricing, like our version of an introductory version, which would be for a very small business.
Cool.
Not, a small business by some is considered to be 100 people.
Yeah, well, that's great. Getting back to your other application just briefly, if you had to pick the most interesting problem that you came up with the coolest solution for in that project, what would it be?
I would have to say that the most interesting piece is just the whole conversion process, and I think that's really what drives the application.
Okay.
Because on the front end, when you're working with those Office object models, they're just kind of convoluted, and they weren't really intended to allow you to get out all the content.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really need someone who is just an ultimate expert in the Office object models to do this type of thing.
Yeah.
And like there's certain places where, let's say you want to pull an image out of PowerPoint, you can't just call image.save and write it to a file. You have to cut it into the clipboard and then like paste it into another slide and then save that slide out as a like a PNG or a JPEG.
Not quite as well designed as the .NET framework.
No, not anywhere near as close. I mean, there's just all these hoops you have to jump through, and sometimes things don't return the right values. Sometimes they return erratic values, and it's just navigating through it all can be amazingly complex.
Have you seen the Camtasia product that will save their desktop video recorder files to Flash?
Yes, I have, and we're actually working on a similar project for the same company to allow you to, insert a demo into your application.
That's cool. Yeah, I use that product to do some how-to videos, and I love it. No, it works great.
Yeah, I mean, especially you get a real small file size. It's almost like using like a terminal server and saving that out, or Placeware or something.
Yeah, and you can't tell you're looking at a video. Well, what's next for you guys? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, going forward, I think our main focus is this content management product, just getting it out the door, and we're fixing to go into beta with it, and so we'll get a lot of community feedback. Initial responses so far have been real great. Everyone loves it.
Cool.
I
and if somebody wants
main thrust, as well as we have some real cool consulting projects in the works.
So if somebody wants to get involved.
About.
If somebody wants to get involved in the beta of your content management system, they should hit up your blog or contact you.
They can find tons of little posts over at the blog. I talk about the content management server and some of the stuff we're doing every once in a while, as well as sending me an email, jesse@activehead.com. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Cool. Well, it's been a pleasurable period of time here talking with you, and thanks for stopping by and sharing that story.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
All right, man. Keep rocking.
All right.
We'll see you.
See ya.
Bye.